Again, my backdrop, America 250. This is a campaign to celebrate America's 250th birthday. The theme, broad theme, is by land, by water, and by air. The effort is to try to encourage Americans to visit facilities, whether it's Fish and Wildlife Service facilities, refuges, hatcheries, get outdoors, National Park Service, specific to the Fish and Wildlife Service. There's a program called Flags Across America where we're recognizing facilities across the country, projects happening across the country. We've got 12 hatcheries involved in that program across the U.S. If you see advertisements for activities near you, we'd love to have you come out. We also are highlighting 12 refuges across the country as well. And we're also planning for something called Capital Cast 2026, which will be a free fishing event for youth in the nation's capital, and trying to get recognition on, from members of the House and Senate about the importance of recreational fishing to the U.S. economy and to being a healthy, thriving outdoor activity. What else can I share with you? Oh, then in fact, probably most piquing your interest is the slate of FY26 projects, NIFAP projects, which I think are due by legislation to be signed by the secretary or his designee by the 25th. Jason Olive did a fantastic job late last week briefing Karen Bud Fallon, Special Assistant to the Secretary's Office, on that slate, on that project slate, as well as a timeline. He was successful. Jason, you probably don't know this. You were successful at getting some movement on that effort. We understand that in the past, this effort has been, or the signature authority has been assigned to the Assistant Secretary for Fish and Wildlife and Parks. The Secretary himself wants to review these and be the signature on these projects. And all indications, although we couldn't get it signed prior to this meeting, which we were trying to do, they have assured us that they'll meet the deadline to have your request signed prior to September 25th. What else can I share? Things that might impact you as you talk about how to further expand, and if happen, who to reach out to in some of your conversations earlier this afternoon. The Sport Fishing and Boating Partnership Council, Federal Advisory Council, to the Secretary and to the Department of Commerce through NOAA's National Marine Fisheries Service. That partnership is still on pause. Its charter has expired, which means that program cannot meet. The charter has been drafted. It's under review currently. As soon as that charter is approved, the service will start working with the Department of Commerce to fill any vacant seats on that council and reestablish that council and get it meeting again. And then maybe finally, the National Outreach and Communications Program grant project. This is the program that had funded Recreational Boating Fishing Foundation. There's $26 million to be awarded across recipients over the remaining 2 years of that grant cycle. The notice of funding opportunity closed in August. We've received over 200 proposals from 170 entities, including 21 states. In those proposals, there's more than $500 million in requests. So the need is certainly out there, evidenced by the number of requests that were received and the dollar amounts received, $500 million to the $26 million available. The merit review process to look at those proposals, it was underway, and we anticipate awarding those $26 million prior to the end of the calendar year. So with that, Mr. Chair, I think I will pause or stop and be happy to take questions or turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Dave. And I will, thank you to Jason. Thanks for Dave for sharing Jason's good work. It's good to hear about the support for the projects and with the goal for trying to get them signed by the 25th, and the AFWA annual meeting will be starting on Sunday. And if there be any chance that the projects will be approved at some point during the annual meeting. We've really been trying to elevate the prominence of NIFHAP within the Aqua family, and would definitely be an opportunity for the director or anybody else to make that announcement to a room full of people, and be happy to coordinate that with your office.
That'd be great. I will be there, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to keep you up to date on what's happening on that timeline.
Yeah, good. Well, Dave, thanks for all those updates. Any questions? Really unique opportunity here.
Yeah, question. Yeah, Dave Golden here. Question about the 26 million in funding. You said that it will be awarded by the end of the calendar year. Will it be announced? Are you saying it'll be announced then, or those will be awarded?
Sure. Thanks, Dave. Should be awarded and announced. Correct. What we would do is let the recipients know that they've been successful, and we'll make a broad announcement about those awards.
Thanks. Yes, Mike Leonard.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Mike Leonard, thank you, Dave. Any more insights on timing of the Sport Fishing Boating Partnership Council? There's several folks sitting around the table here who have a vested interest. It's of relevance to everybody, but several of us that have maybe time and sweat equity put into that council. So I know it's important to you and important to the service, but I guess not a question unless you have more definitive timeline, more just an emphasis on the importance of getting that up and running as quickly as possible, just given how many important projects are still on walls that council has been putting a lot of important towards.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, for the question. And yeah, I don't have a strong timeline for you. What I can say, I think, to the positive side is we're getting an understanding, getting the political team up to an understanding of the importance of these councils. We developed a briefing for Assistant Secretary of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks on FACA councils themselves, the hunting, sport shooting, and I forget the name of the council now. It's been renamed. It's moving forward. I think Sport Fish Council will be the next one that they take action on. So I'm positive. I've lost my words, Mike. Hopeful that we'll see movement here in the not too distant future on Sport Fish Boating Partnership Council.
Thanks.
Well, Dave, I know I speak on behalf of the whole board and on all the Fish Habitat Partnership, but thank you to you, thank you for the service, thank you for the service employees that are playing such a valuable role with more. I think part of the reason we have the momentum that we do is because of your support that comes across so clearly. So thanks for leading from the top and keeping them at the top.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And if I just remind me one thing, sorry to delay, just we have a lot of acting folks across the service in the field. And if your contacts there are waning, don't be afraid to make sure you reach out to either Jason or somebody to make sure we get you in contact with the right folks if you got federal contacts that you're not hearing from. Because again, there's been a lot of shifting, a lot of moving, and a lot of folks in acting positions. So let's make sure we keep you connected.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you all.
Thank you. All righty. So actually, wanted to give Dave his due there real quickly before we head to Dave Smith. Any more questions for Joe? Did we to jump again there, Joe? But any questions for Joe in his presentation? All right, then Jason's going to take the next introduction, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair.
And by the way, can we give like a round of applause for Jason? I think we just go, of course, nice job.
I appreciate that, but all the credit goes to Dave, Michael, and Martha, because as you said, the reason NIFHAP is on the trajectory it's on, and I mean, I'll give credit to Steve Gurton between Steve Gurton and Dave Michael, there's just been incredible support for NIFHAP in the higher levels of the Fish and Wildlife Service, and Martha has come on in FAC since January and has immediately jumped in as a champion of NIFHAP in DC. And so I'm just the person sitting in the chair. I haven't done it, but it's Dave and Martha's support that's critical. So want to introduce our next speaker, and I'd like to give a real long introduction, but I don't want to take any of the time because I think it's going to be an awesome presentation. But I'll just say some of you are wondering why in the world we have a migratory bird presentation and a fish habitat partnership meeting. And I'll tell you quick, just real quick, the person who hired me at the service, my first supervisor, Eric McMillan, he told me shortly after I started, he said, you need to talk to some of the migratory bird joint venture coordinators because NIFAP was modeled off of that. Maybe see if you can get some ideas for how they've done things. They've been around about 20 years longer than NIFAP. And so I already knew from just my interactions with WAFWA folks and folks out west that Intermountain West Joint Venture was the powerhouse joint venture. There's a lot of other great ones, but Intermountain West Joint Venture had a reputation. And so I thought, well, I'm gonna reach out to their coordinator first. And so I reached out to Dave and just asked for a little bit of his time to give me some insight into how they do things. And after he told me his story, it blew my mind. And I said, everybody needs to hear this story. So this was 2 years ago. So this has been 2 years in the making, been wanting to get him to give a presentation. And I thought, maybe one of these days we could get him on Teams to give a presentation. And he was so gracious that he said, no, I want to come in person. So he flew over here from Montana to talk to this group in person, and it's relevant to the board. It's relevant to the FHP coordinators. And I'll just say that the biggest mistake anyone could make in the audience is to hear this and think that the same thing can't be done by a fish habitat partnership that they've done. It's 100% can be done by us. It can follow the model that they've done. So, Dave, thank you so much for coming. Looking forward to hearing the Intermountain West joint venture story.
More than needed on the introduction there. That I appreciate it though, Jason. I thought, well, at least I better put a picture of a good fisheries landscape up here. So y'all been to the Big Hole Valley of Montana. It's a pretty cool place for birds and fish. But what I wanted to kind of get into a little bit today is more of a story. And so, in terms of format here and time and all that, if y'all have questions, interrupt me.
You're bringing us home, so you take most time.
This is more of an 18-year story than it is. This is the only way to do things. I just want to share kind of where we were in 2007 and where we are today and kind of what happened, during that time period. So, the Intermountain West region, we're parts of 11 states in the West. And, our JV story goes back to migratory birds, North American Waterfowl Management Plan, set up very similar to this board, the plan committee. It has been, our focus has and always will be habitat conservation on the ground. And so there will be parts of this story that'll sound like we've moved away from habitat conservation somehow, but that's the one point I just want to leave y'all is that this is what we do. This is what we will do 20 years, 50 years from now, get habitat conservation on the ground. So when you kind of go back a little bit, I came onto the JV in 2007, and it was under kind of dire circumstances at the time. We had a joint venture that didn't have real good governance procedures, bylaws, that kind of thing, and there were some factions of the board that wanted to go different directions. And when I was hired, we had gone from 29 board members down to 9, and those 9 board members were of the mind at that point in time, like, let's rethink a little bit, of what we've done. JV was established in 1994. This is March of 2007. I come into the kind of open forum, like let's think about the Intermountain West. What should we be doing to get conservation done on the ground that really matters? And so at that point in time, we had a budget of about $890,000 from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I said the 1234 number is very similar to your NIFAP, contribution. It's the JV line item in the appropriations bill every year has been, back then it was about 12 million. Today it's 16.8. So we've been growing. The national line item has been growing. We actually have an $828,000 increase in the FY26 House appropriations mark, which is pretty cool given the status of things on the Hill right now. But anyway, that growth in JV funding from 12 to, say 17 million or so over, 18 years is nice and we appreciate it. But, when you really look at how that works at a JV level, those funds are carved up amongst 18 joint ventures, just like, carve up the money with the fish habitat partnerships. And so our line item was 890. And so we had ConocoPhillips was on our board and they kind of liked the whole idea and they gave us $20,000 of discretionary funding at that point in time. So I inherited, one full-time staff and several part-time contractors. And at that point in time, we ran about $300,000 out the door in a grants program that we administered, called the project funding program. And, over the 6 previous years that program, had been part of the JV operation, I tallied it up the other day. We ran out 1.85 million, and rolled up all the accomplishments of those 55, 60 projects. And it was about 31,000 acres of work that had been done on the ground. And it was wetlands and it was sagebrush, all kinds of things. And so, we looked at that and it was just at a time where the board's going, is this what we should be doing? And we also did some partnership support building and whatnot to our 11 states with these things called state steering committees. So, I really was tasked by the board to go back and think this through, and are there other things we might consider? And that was really the task at hand. And so at that point in time, it was really partnership building and habitat projects. So came back, fall board meeting 6 months later after talking to a lot of folks across the West. And, there was just some light bulbs that went on all those visits with people on the ground across the 11 states. And one was that state fish and wildlife agencies weren't very well represented on our board. So we had a couple board members, got him Dwayne Schroff. Some of you may know Dwayne was the longest tenured state director at the time, Arizona Game and Fish. And Dwayne was a big picture guy. And he was always thinking, at scale. And he says, we got to get the states here. States need to be on this thing. But we also need to be relevant, And so, states deliberating once a year over how we're going to spend $300,000 may not warrant the director's time. It warrants mine because I believe in the big picture, but that may be kind of hard. So a couple things happened at once. Dwayne recruited 4 more, well, it was Dwayne, Larry Kreckenberg, and then 3 other state directors joined the board, right away. So we have 5 directors on the board. And I sized this all up and just said, here I was mid-career, 40 years old. I got a bachelor's degree and no more. My whole life was habitat conservation. I was never a good scientist. I was habitat biologist from day one. And I'm like, I hate to say it, guys, but I think the first thing we ought to do is kill the habitat program. And if you don't think that went over in some strange looks from our board members that really love the habitat investment on the ground thing. And I said, here's why. How are we going to even find 5,000 acres of habitat work a year across the Intermountain West region? Even if it was the most strategic, perfect habitat work, is 5,000 acres. And so if we're comfortable with that, let's do it. But if we want to explore something bigger, more impactful, might impact bird populations, 5,000 acres a year, spending a good chunk of our budget isn't going to cut it. So they said, okay, what do we do? And I said, look, I went around and talked to all these partners across the region. They keep saying capacity is what we're limited by. We need people. If we have people, we can go get funding for on the ground projects from a lot of different sources. But, we understand y'all don't fund people, you fund projects. I said, look, that's the beauty of the JV program. We don't even have organic legislation. This is a line item in the Fish and Wildlife Service budget driven by the self-directed management board structure, So anyway, so that became kind of the idea. Like, okay, let's convert that 300, redirect the 300 to the capacity building effort. We did the capacity grants for a couple of years and it was good, but it was still NGOs requesting kind of what they needed, maybe a little bit more than what we really believe could be strategic. So, in 2012, NRCS approached us and said, look, we got $18 million to do sagebrush habitat work for sage grouse. We don't have the wherewithal to get this on the ground very effectively. Can you help us, JB, build capacity to implement this $18 million? I said, yes, let's figure it out. So the next year, they put together an agreement, and it was turned out to be a 9.3 5-year agreement. NRCS provided the JV funds. We then turned around and helped them put boots on the ground in their field offices. So these are wildlife biologists, range cons, folks that would be waking up in the morning thinking about sage grouse, sagebrush, wildlife in spots where their soil con or their other conservation planners may, just not, that may not rose to the top, right? What they were thinking about. So anyway, so we entered into this, we call it the SGI Strategic Watershed Action Team, put these 24 positions on the landscape. And so again, ConocoPhillips had increased their funding at that point to us, said we want to be first cash on the barrel head to help this thing along. So they go from 20,000 to 100,000. And so then we're cost sharing, and NRCS provided the bulk of the funding for the on the ground positions. And they provided all the funding for the on the ground treatments on the landscape. And so that went from all of a sudden in 5 years, we rolled it all up and it was 2.8 million acres of really pretty strategically science-based sagebrush conservation work. It was improved grazing systems, it was conifer removal, it was mesic habitat. These things that, WAFA had really written in their sage grouse conservation strategy way back in 2006. This was like, wow, we're actually doing 30, 40, $50 million of work. NRCS was. And so they rolled it all up after 4 years. The agency itself put $296 million on the ground in 5 years. And our boots on the ground, the 24 people touched about half of that work. So it was, they rolled up like 5.5 million acres over those 5 years of treatments. And our folks were in on 2.8 million of that. So at that point in time, and I'm gonna stop there and just ask any questions on kind of the history of our board at that point in time. I think never looked back, right? They were like, this is the kind of scale we can actually work at. So question on that.
With this many people, that many people, where'd you find people?
These were, a lot of them were early career folks. Obviously, there were a lot of people that had a wildlife and range background, so they could understand the range management stuff, but they understood wildlife or, masters in wildlife, bachelors in range, or vice versa. They were willing to go to work because they were hosted by not a government agency. We were able to move really quickly. We didn't have FTE caps or anything to worry about. These were mostly hosted by, Pheasants Forever, Mule Deer Foundation. It was Rocky Mountain Elk. It was conservation districts, a variety of hosting entities said, yeah, we'll do the HR piece. We'll hire this individual, put them in this field office. And it was shared supervision, right? So the NRCS district conservationist, but then it was the state game and fish person that helped fund it or put the idea together. And so they kind of were individuals that were in an NRCS setting, but they weren't like owned by the NRCS.
You say they were funded by them?
Yeah, go ahead.
Funded by NRCS?
The vast majority of it, yeah, about 75 cents on the dollar was NRCS funds. But, and from their standpoint, they were like, geez, we got 24 people at 75 cents on the dollar. And so it was, and they had their own, at times, different FTE caps, things like that. So,
And where's the other 25%?
we found that was ConocoPhillips really started stepping up, throwing money in, Rocky Mountain Power, state agencies, state fish and wildlife agencies from their habitat branches, things like that, kicked in little bits of funding. But when you looked at one of those positions back then, it was maybe $80,000 or something for the entire position. So 25% of that wasn't a whole lot. And we bring some of that from the JV from our, what used to be our 300 that we spent on habitat projects, conical bunny, things like that. And so we were delivering the state agency a pretty good deal, of getting the sagebrush, sage grouse work they wanted done. We were delivering to NRCS on their mission.
How did sage grouse align with
1234 funds in the migratory bird control.
We did a study. We had a guy named, they were actually did a couple projects. We had a couple of research projects that went out and looked at sage grouse treatments that are done specifically for sage grouse and the impact on migratory sagebrush habitat migratory birds. And it was pretty compelling. Yeah, you're removing these encroaching conifers, brooder sparrows, sage thrashers, and things where populations of those songbirds were expanding. So that was a connection. But the sage grouse brought the relevancy for sure. You know, this was 2012, you know, right before the big listing decision was forthcoming. And really when the listing decision happened, one of our board members, Dwayne Coombs, was on the table with at the event with Sally Jewell. She says this is epic conservation partnership that avoided this listing. So then, you know, Conoco and other partnership, like, okay, that worked. So let me kind of continue on here, but I just wanted to leave that. Yeah, go ahead.
How did you mention NRCS game team? How did you stumble into each other?
You know, some of that was understanding of the, you know, I'd worked for NRCS for 3 years before I came into the JV job. So I was probably a little biased about this agency, you know, having a lot of resources and a lot of potential to get things done. But then a guy that I had worked with early in my career, Tim Griffiths, became the Sage Grouse Initiative coordinator for NRCS. We just knew each other, started talking and kind of put this deal together. But they funded 9.3 million through the JV over 5 years to, again, finance the capacity. Also finance some science. We made big science, you know, leaps during those 5 years. So let me back up there. So now, you know, kind of flash forward for a minute to 2025. Okay. Today it's crystal clear, you know, from our JV view, that the challenges that we're facing on the landscape are immense in scale in the West. And so, you know, really the big 3 or 4 right now are fire and invasives, are changing the sagebrush country at a clip that is not sustainable. You know, we are losing a lot of sagebrush habitat. It's not due to oil and gas roads. It is fire, invasive annual grasses, cheatgrass, more fire, more cheatgrass. All that. Western forests have suffered from 100 years of, you know, fire suppression, you know, frankly. Wetlands are drying, you know, nobody's draining them. They're drying due to climate, water demands, and all these things. So when we really look at these challenges at the scale at which these things are operating, it's really convincing that we can't get at that unless we can work big. You know, kind of, we had a board member once, go big or go home, you know, and so that really has become, you know, our mantra in recent years is we got to be working at the hundreds of thousands of acres scale per year, maybe millions of acres of scale. We got to find ways to help get work done at that scale. Okay, who can finance that? So that kind of led to the board of today. So this is our joint venture management board and our board of directors. And so that idea that Dwayne planted way back with the state agency directors is absolutely rock solid today. We've got four state fish and wildlife agency directors serving on the board. We had three before Hugh retired from the Fish and Wildlife Service. All 3 of our regional directors of Fish and Wildlife Service put on the board. Paul was recently acting. Brian Nesbitt, Director Nesbitt, mentioned earlier, and Jay Shirley, the deputy principal for the service, were both on our board the last 4 or 5 years. Jay, I guess 3 years, Brian about 5. And then, you know, this category here of the private and corporate is really, it's landowners, ranchers, energy companies. We've got timber interest on the board now and Sierra Pacific Industries. So that board, I think even, you know, the reason they're there is working at scale. So it's kind of like Jason asked me one time, what was first, the chicken or the egg? I'm like, the board's what it is today because we're working at a really big scale. If we weren't, I don't think they would, this level of folks with this level of influence, and find the time for it. So then you know, like we get into, you know, tough times this spring, you know, with the funding freezes on federal funding and all that. And, you know, I told Martin and Jason at Summer Waffle, I'm like, I don't know if you guys want to follow this model right now. This model makes higher straits due to IRA and bill pros and all that. And literally it was 2 weeks after the Waffle meeting, you know, thanks to Paul, Josh Corsi, probably some others, all that funding was unfroze and everything's flowing. So we never lost a dime, you know, in all that happened this year. So, you know, that has led to a staff today, you know, I mentioned we had 3.5, you know, 4.5 employees way back. We've got 17 full-time employees now. None of these JV employees, there's only 2 of us that are actually federal employees. Myself, and Brian, one of our staff, our Fish and Wildlife Service. The rest of them are employed by WAFLA, and the Wildlife Management Institute. So WMI and WAFLA have stepped up to be the hosting entities for the core staff, which has worked really well. And, you know, our conservation programs today is still sagebrush. We've got a big water program. We're working on Western Forest now. So what we do though goes all the way back to that, you know, kind of breakthrough on the sage grouse days. And that was our niche. You know, I appreciate the Glacial Lakes presentation today. The point about niche is, you know, there's NGOs that do a lot of this work. You know, how's this partnership? How's this, you know, in our case, joint venture partnership or partnership or a fish habitat partnership? How are you different? What's your niche? What's your sweet spot? And our niche really has become, let's build capacity on the ground, boots on the ground, people out there that are then touching, you know, helping direct hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars to on the ground treatments. And, you know, we support all that with you know, we used to be kind of our science program. Today it's science to implementation, in fact, implementation to science, you know, and really we have 3 PhD level folks on our staff that probably will never publish another paper in their career, but they're all 3 just wired to figure out how to help get academia hooked up to the implementation crowd. We have a good comms department. We have 3 full-time communication specialists, and then, you know, grants managers and so forth to handle the funds. You know, and like, you know, in the Intermountain West though, this picture I think says a lot of like the places we're working. This is the public lands, this is private land. And these green ribbons that run through our region, you can't really break apart and say, Steve, the Forest Service, take care of all your forested land. BLM, take care of all your sagebrush land. Private landowners, take care of this. You know, there's just a level of interconnectedness in the land ownership and in the habitats, how they function together, that we really believed all along that we had to be public-private. We had to be working across ownership boundaries. So started really with the BLM and the NRCS, big partnerships. And I'll give you a little snap of the sagebrush work here. We got these massive fires going on here last 20 years. Had our science team look at what would it take to hold the line, you know, in sagebrush functioning for grouse, for songbirds, for mule deer. You know, it's of this scale. It's of this scale of conservation treatments per year to really hold the line. And so, you know, what are we doing? You know, putting that science, trying to put it into practice, but its capacity is at the center of it. So after the NRCS 5 years, we were approached by the BLM. So Steve Small was their wildlife division chief role that Frank Bauman's in today. And Steve approached us and said, look, how can we do this? So they went into BLM, essentially replicated the, you know, what we did with NRCS, addressing the major threats, you know, getting work done on the ground. And that was, again, we've got a map on our website that shows all of these capacity positions, but right now we've got about 27 cost shared positions with BLM, working in BLM settings across the West. And very similar model to that early NRCS piece, you know, about 75% comes from BLM, but these folks are out there on the ground, waking up in the morning, thinking about the strategic work that's going to benefit sagebrush wildlife population, and it's going to benefit people who make their living in that part of the world. So, yeah, 10 western states, 27 positions. This is one I really want you to kind of take home though. So if you really, this guy named Connor White, Connor lives down in southern Idaho. And, so when we roll up what are these folks getting done each year? Connor is year in, year out helping deliver more than $1 million in conservation projects, NRCS, BLM. And I mean, some years quite a bit more than that. But what does his position cost? So these days, roughly 100 grand, 75K comes from, in this case, BLM. The other 25, we find it from various sources. But then we turn that into $1 million of work on the ground. And if he wasn't there, the agency would still be there doing their thing, but they wouldn't probably be working across the ownership boundaries. They wouldn't be at the same pace that they are with just this fired up Connor White in that landscape. And so that's kind of been our story here, is that if we, so we meet with ConocoPhillips every year. They say, we're a company that, makes investments. Why should we keep doing this? And we show them these numbers and they go, oh, we put 10,000 into that and $1 million came out on the back end. So anyway, it's a different model. And I'm not here today to say that this is the only way to go, but I'm saying this is how we've gone and why, because we just wouldn't be relevant today, I don't think, in the West with, our model that we had 20 years ago. Yeah. So water, very similar story here. We're working on water issues across the West, fisheries, of which we worked a lot with Treese Thompson with the Wintee over the years and trying to find sweet spots to put these things together for flood irrigation on working ranches, improving fish passage, avoiding entrainment, all those kinds of things. This is kind of the work. This is the on the ground habitat work that we're doing. We're using some pretty good science to put that all together. Again, 19 positions supported, by this type of worker, to do this kind of work. NRCS is the main funder on this, whereas BLM is the main funder on the sagebrush side. And then recently, what about the Forest Service? So huge thanks to Steve and Chris French and your team, Jackie Buchanan. Steve basically signed this morning what's going to be a $5 million interagency agreement between us and the Forest Service to work on. In this case, building, we're going to be really looking at these three objectives: bird habitat conservation, reducing wildfire risk, being relevant to people, Indian juniper, dry pine, dry forest systems. And, but in the dry pine, the Forest Service agreement really is going to help us work with 3 different tribes to expand tribal forestry capacity to implement work on national forests through good neighbor authority agreements. So again, it gets back to our bird mission, but it's another way to get, using that same model, way to get things done on the ground. And then with all this is that board, as the work became kind of relevant, then the interest in the board really stepped up, so again, the region to Paul Souza, it's like, when can I get on this board? That kind of thing. And so we worked pretty hard to recruit, from that private sector, from the agricultural producers in the West, particularly grass-based ag ranchers and the energy companies, 2 important sectors to us. Then they brought a ton of connections on the Hill and, with the leadership of the agencies. And so we've got a pretty robust government relations committee now that we do, at least one major flying year, did 2 this year. We were in DC last week. And, so again, that private sector of our board, because they can, and they do have the connections on Capitol Hill, committee staff with members, they've been able to really champion some of these conservation funding sources that are really important to the JV partnership. So it's been a powerful, body of work over the years of Western folks wearing cowboy hats and whatnot coming back to DC. And, regardless of administration, regardless of majority in Congress, we've had really, really good access, have great access right now. So anyway, so that, that's kind of part of this whole story, I think, in a way, but I'm just gonna wrap up with, conservation funding to work at scale. What now, we can talk about, hey, this model is great and all that, but if we don't have the funding, how's it really, how can you really get there? And so, in the last administration, obviously there was Congress passed the bipartisan infrastructure law and the IRA, lots of funding available. This administration, much less favorable to particularly the IRA. What we're constantly trying to do is say, look, we have these Western issues, forest health, iron invasives and your rangelands. This affects your timber industry, it affects your ranchers, it affects your energy companies. How do we, we need funding, we need resources to be devoted to the BLM, devoted to the Forest Service, devoted to NRCS. We have those resources within those three big federal agencies, and we have the states working closely with them through, again, that's through our board partnership. We can get things done that matter to the Trump administration, that matter to the Biden administration, Trump won, Obama, it doesn't matter. We can find things that matter to each administration. So funding at scale really is at the forefront of our thinking. So think of this year, the IRA, you can just tell from inauguration day on, did not like how that all happened and both partisan manner. Glenn Thompson, House Ag Committee Chair, stood up pretty early. Says, yeah, maybe we don't need the climate focus on all this ag money, but we need this ag money. There are producers across the United States have really expressed a demand for more conservation funding. So we had a 2018 Farm Bill that was, if you look at the numbers there, EQIP was funded at about $2 billion a year, $300 million RCPP, $450 for the easement program. And lo and behold, in 2025, in this year of all this debate over, the Doge, thing, all that, Chairman Thompson basically convinces his colleagues on the Hill to pass in the reconciliation bill, the one big beautiful bill, pass statute that basically extends those funds takes those IRA funds and puts them into the Farm Bill conservation title for the next, all the way through 2031. At levels that are really, time and a half, 1.5 or so from where we even were in 2018. So this was a big deal, to see the conservation, private lands, conservation programs funded at this level, at this point in time, gives us a lot of opportunity to work with NRCS over these next part of the next decade. So there's that. Then on BLM, a lot of our board members, have been in DC twice this year. They're saying, look, keep in mind here, doing nothing comes at a really significant cost. You say we put all the proactive work in the sagebrush, on dealing with invasive annual grasses. What's that going to lead us to? That's going to lead bigger fires, more damage, loss of lives, all this stuff. So an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So let's stay active in the BLM fuels program. Let's deal with these fuels. Let's work hard at this proactively. And if we can do that, the numbers are going to pencil out favorably in the long haul. So, that's kind of what the focus right now has been: increased suppression, but not increase the proactive. The bill increase the proactive significantly. So we're working really hard right now to try to get that message across. And I think there'll be some success, but this at the end of the day, those boots on the ground, we've got 46 of these people out on the field now in these rural settings across the West. And this is the kind of numbers that they're touching, that we've had a hand in. Fish and Wildlife Service bill money, touch about 10 of that, BLM, about 10. NRCS still 47 million a year going through the Sage Grouse Initiative. The IRA BLM money was significant. That won't, that likely won't be continued, but even on a bad day, I mean, this was about $125 million a year of on the ground treatments that are going into habitat work, going into things that can benefit wildlife habitat. Even if it's 60 or 70 million, it's still pretty significant. And so we may wane, there may be ups and downs in all this, but that's the kind of scale we're really trying to work at. So last couple slides, the IWJB business model, for where we were, $910,000 a year. Our budget last year was 6.73 million. Those are just the dollars flowing through the office. That doesn't account any of the on the ground treatments. That's just the capacity piece. And so our Fish and Wildlife Service, our base JV funding only increased from 890 to about 1.1 million during that 18 years, which really didn't even keep up with inflation, And so the big growth has been all these other funds, going from 20 grand to 5.5 million. So, we were almost 100% of our staff and most of our budget being just our baseline item appropriated funds. Today we're 17% of the total budget, 38% of the staff. So in other words, we've got 17 full-time employees. If we hadn't have done all this, those 17 wouldn't be there. We'd have 6 or 7, which then would probably affect our ability to be relevant to our board, all this stuff. So the growth has all been not on our 1234 fund side. The growth, 96% of the growth was on the partner contributions. This is kind of what it looks like. This is our pie chart today. BLM funds about 45% of our budget, the total funds flowing through the office. The baseline items about 20%. NRCS is at 22. ConocoPhillips 8%. So it's kind of interesting that an oil and gas company is funding almost as much as our base. Half as much as our base these days. And when you look at staff, even our staff, 11% of our covered by one oil and gas company. So the take home, I guess, to me, over 18 years of just this story has been that board engagement and, getting the right people on this board mattered a lot. We've narrowed into some things that I think we can do pretty well, niche, all that. Boots on the ground, science and implementation, communications, and the DC presence. That's the IWJ of the day. I personally kind of feel like fish habitat partnerships, there's a lot of this that, at least the bigger ones, the ones that are multi-state and all that can probably, there may be elements of this that would fit into your all's operations. So that's what I've got. Any rest of the time here, I just want to answer questions and share any other thoughts.
Dave, it's absolutely true. I mean, when we first developed, in fact, you said, folks, right? It's like everything we can learn how to do. That's 2004 was a long time ago. How have the other JVs done in sort of building on this sort of model that you've developed here in Southwest?
There's a lot of it. I mean, NRCS is funding, has agreements with a number of JVs now. Very similar, field delivery capacity kind of focus things. Some cases, communication, some science work are built into those. The oil and gas industry, Conoco has stepped up. They're directly funding 6 joint ventures right now. And I was really impressed. We were in DC in May, and it's kind of chaotic. It's just, guys have been back there, no. And we made a pretty strong pitch to the other JV coordinators that you got folks that are ag producers that are affiliated with energy groups, that can come and talk right now. It'd be a good time to do so. And they really delivered. Oaks and Prairies, Rio Grande, Prairie Pothole, Northern Great Plains JVs. They brought landowners back. I mean, one of them had direct connection with Secretary Burgum, had a meeting face to face with the secretary, and so I really see the other JVs now. you know, it's not all gonna happen, 18, you know, habitat joint ventures all at once decide this is the way they wanna go, but there's a number of them that are kind of working in this, probably in this vein, you know, with some good success. You know, so Playa Lakes, it's always, I mean, they were right along with us early on, kind of thinking like this, and so Playa Lakes, you know, they've got a staff of 14 or 15 right now. They've done some amazing work in the water space, you know, aquifer recharge, all that. But relevancy, I think is what the ones that have had success, they've looked at how are we relevant? Yeah, got to be working on stuff that matters. Or go ahead.
So thank you, and I'm interested in your perspective because you said that you have been a biologist, habitat biologist, and then you grew from an organization of 4.5 people to 64 people. Is that correct?
Yeah, we've got 17 core staff and then 46 on the ground partner positions that are we've helped put on the ground through our agreements that come through us.
So can you speak to any of the lessons that you've learned? I know it was over a number of years of expanding that way operationally, how to structure the workload, the oversight, who's doing review of the employees, their work plans, and directing what they're working on, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it was good. I mean, you know, I think at the core, I was telling Jason at lunch today, at the core of kind of how we've operated, we've worked with 2 federal agencies so far, 2 important ones in our part of the world. We're about to work with a 3rd one. The lesson I can pass along that's probably most meaningful is that build your work around their objectives. You know, if we're going to work with the BLM, we have to understand what the BLM really needs. It's not about the IWJV coming and saying, we want to do this or we want to do that. We need to understand where their pressure points are, where their capacity gaps are. You know, how can we help you? And NRCS has clearly been that way. It's been, you know, relationships have been formed with state conservationists over the years. And so when, you know, and I'll get to kind of the human management of all this stuff, but when we really build that as like, that's our foundation. We can't help the BLM if we're not, I mean, we can't work with BLM if we're not helping. We can't work with Steve's agency if we're not helping you deliver on your objectives. So then the folks kind of become, that becomes steeped in their thought process every day. But again, they have other funders on all these positions. Nobody's just funded by the BLM or by the NRCS or whatever. So then they also have to think about, I'm here to help. I'm here to help State Fish and Wildlife Agency, whoever else is chipping in here. And so if you kind of get that going, these people quickly become really, really good partnership people, you know, and you recruit for good people that really want to work in that environment. And so then the management of all of that, we've managed our core staff, but then we really have this kind of like management of the field capacity positions that's jointly done with whoever's funding, hosting, all that. So if Pheasants Forever hosting a position with, Wyoming Game and Fish, then it's going to be the Game and Fish person, Pheasants Forever person, Mandy from our staff will be sitting down talking about what the work plan is, the evaluation of their work during the year. So it's really shared. It's different than a lot of our government agencies. You know, I'm a service employee. I've worked for a long time. You tend to kind of go, this is our program, this is our position. We kind of say most of these positions are jointly owned. And so it just creates a little bit of different dynamic thought process.
I just want to make a note real quick for folks who are not as familiar with the farm bill programs, and might need to get Chris Horton to give a webinar or something to everybody on that sometime, to the FHP coordinators. If you're not familiar with those programs, the Dave's are out there, EQIP, RCPP, aquatic habitat's eligible for all of that. That's not just sagebrush, terrestrial stuff that only they can do. There's tons of aquatic stuff. Chris has written articles and stuff, podcasts.
Heidi, we're not learning a lot.
Yeah, just want to make that note.
Yeah. Steve, you have a question?
Yeah, I mean,
More of a comment. So, there's gonna be political ebbs and flows. And that's, your point, Dave, is a really good one about dealing with that. In the Forest Service, it's been history for us to think we gotta do things on our own, which means we got our own people. Well, it has bitten us. We've lost almost 5,000 non-fire employees, and we're probably gonna lose more. And so groups like Dave, they're filling a different niche than they might have historically. And it's critically important to the current and future success of federal agencies. We're never gonna do it. And I think you're gonna see a whole lot of, even if they do give us more money in the future, whoever, yeah, I still think we're not gonna be at a place where we're gonna do massive hiring again. Just because, you saw that statistic that Dave showed up on a screen where 38% of his funds are going towards people and the rest of it. Well, I mean, that's a big deal. In federal agencies, a lot of times we're like 85%. And depending on the federal agency. And so, yeah, these are really important things. And I think what matters, I mean, to get some of your point, it's about the habitat. It's not about the critter. Yep. And so this partners for us, like National Wild Turkey Federation, who are historically been all about turkeys, man. We've provided them with hundreds of millions of dollars to do good conservation work underground. And they have stepped right up to the plate. And so really good partners issue that flexibility when you need it the most. And we've just been really, really fortunate. And I'm glad that we're going to be pushing forward with the Around Western Adventure. So appreciate that.
Well, we can't say thanks enough, Steve, just for seeing kind of the opportunity and find it, like with the Forest Service for us, talk about niche. We work with I mean, I went through this for 18 years. How do we work with the Forest Service? How do we work with them? We ended up getting a board member, a guy named Jim Durgalo, is a tribal member, Confederate Salish Kootenai tribes in Montana. And Jim is one of the contractors for the Intertribal Timber Council. His whole, we asked him when he joined the board, Jim, why are you joining our board? And he goes, we have some struggles with the BIA. We want to get work done in our forests. And we've been hamstrung for 100 years of, fire suppression and, objectives not being our own. We want to get work done in our forests, on the surrounding, our, traditional lands, all this. And he said, I see this as a path to maybe do that. And that was 2 years ago. It took us 2 years to kind of figure out how we could do it. But anyway, this, this agreement with Steve's shop now, is going to put 3 foresters in each of those 3 tribal forestry departments, 3 new foresters. They are, they will deliver GNA, work with the National Forest. And they're pretty certain that at least 2 of them within 2 or 3 years, they'll never need another dime from the Forest Service because it'll be self-sustained on retained receipts. As part of what's enabled through the Explore Act for the tribes and counties to retain receipts on timber harvest. So anyway, that's a new, it's a new angle. It's kind of a weird angle maybe for the JVs to be playing, but it really fits in our bread and butter niche of what's on the ground.
I have a question for Steve. Clearly IWJP has a history that demonstrated relevance by their work with NRCS and CLM. But, in terms of another organization, you guys have given funding to Trout Unlimited. They've demonstrated their relevance over the years in terms of doing good habitat work on the ground. What do you need to see from an organization to feel comfortable signing something like you did with them? I'm just picking on you because
It's a great question because we have partners coming to us all the time and saying they can do this, they can do that. And I'll just be honest, we have limited funding. If we do, that's just going to be the nature of the piece. We look for partners who can bring something to the table that we can. That's what we.
Yeah, so for example, we're able to stop to say, Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. Tons of opportunities for, fish passage projects underneath old roads that were there. Would that be the kind of thing?
We've had a tremendous fish passage. We've done great fish passage projects in the last 10 years. We've done for the whole history of our age.
Those sorts of things sort of service wide.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and again, it's about, we talked to Dave, he mentioned niche. Everybody got to fill in. TU has done great with roads and overpasses. We've got most of our partners fulfill a niche or a geographic niche. So, and now we need it more than ever because, you know, the deferred resignation program indiscriminately impacted rates. So you might have one organization that's got no civiculturists and another one that's got no archaeologists or engineers. I mean, and so that we have to naturally work towards filling those gaps in our partners. We do that and they can be much more nimble about it than we can. So, I mean, we're looking for flexibility. We're looking for, I mean, look at what they bring to the table. They bring a lot more to the table than just people. It's knowledge, it's capacity, it's relationships that are also great. So that's what we're. Thanks.
So, David, look like, I just want to make sure I got this correct. You made a big shift early on in your career with the joint venture from habitat project delivery to being more of a enabler, capacity builder type organization. And that's, you think that's what fueled the growth? I mean, is that where the big growth started?
It got us to, you know, with the direct projects, there was a cap on how we were only working in a small area, you know, maybe and there was a story too of sharing days, you know, like the original joint venture coordinator, Jim Cole. And he worked, of course, there was feeling no career, and he, you know, he moved into a big job, established in the early '90s, mid-'90s. And Jim understood, you know, political connections and all that, so he populated the original core. Unlike a lot of other joint ventures, there were mining companies, there was oil and gas, there was ranchers, farmers, you know. He brought the Intermountain West flavor to that board. It was the key, you know, for founders of the board, right? And that was brilliant because that was something different. Usually the wildlife group was kind of an interagency wildlife, you know, we're working on our wildlife stuff, you know. They started way long before my day with that kind of mindset. So then, you know, they get that mindset there, and then the view at, you know, say in the early 2000s was, okay, JV funding, a couple million, 10 million. Then in that, we're gonna go to, we're gonna be like the pocket program, right? And so that really was the original game plan, was to just see the JV funding go from 10 to 12 to 30 to 50 or whatever. If each joint venture would have had then moving 3, 4, 5 million a year to maybe at that point, we would have just kept doing habitat projects and whatever. But when you consider $300,000 as opposed to that vision that the board members had of 5 million, the impact of 300,000 in our geography is not there. And so that really led to the, can we make this work by spending little bits of money on people, gathering money from others to spend on people, and then have people access, help deliver billions and billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of acres of treatment. And that is really
So we do have some questions online that I don't want to miss. And I'll also note we are past time, and I hate not ending on time. But this is such a great discussion that we're gonna go with all people want. I would just say, if anybody needs to step out, if you had previous call scheduled to go somewhere, don't hesitate to sort of filter out. We won't be back at 9 o'clock that morning, but I don't work with breaks of this. If you need to go, don't hesitate to read the questions online before we stop. Christopher's unmuted. Go ahead, Christopher.
Well, am I off?
Yes.
Am I off mute now?
Yeah, you're good.
Am I good? Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, first of all, that was an awesome presentation, and thank you, Jason, for bringing it together. That's really links us to the very early NIFHAP 2006 model for this kind of coordination and lessons we can all learn and share, bridging land and water, and all the things we do as Fish and Wildlife agencies and others. So there's a couple areas, if they weren't covered or they can be covered later, I'd appreciate if you might expand upon how you think NIFHAP might improve its coordination with JVs. And then the other, I see you mentioned tribal, but I was kind of curious about the types of contributions that are coming from the state fish and wildlife agencies or other
organizations like the state water managers and quality managers that are in the Western States Water Council. And thank you. I think that was an awesome presentation.
Well, thanks, Chris. I'll start with the first one on the partnerships between, the fish habitat partnerships and the JVs. I think there's tremendous opportunity to just share. And, you know, I mean, one thing that, you know, I really want you all to know is in my work with Therese Thompson, the Winty over the years and getting to know Martin a little bit now. I can tell you one thing that's absolute fact. The fish habitat partnerships are ahead of the JVs, or we're ahead, certainly ahead of where we were in 2007 in terms of your science foundation. We were still kind of putting the science together, you know. I think with the state, you know, like Winty and WAFA and the fish habitat chiefs, all that the fish habitat partnership in my mind there was at a higher level than we were in terms of being strategic with dollars. And so, you know, I think we've got there in some ways now, but boy, 18 years ago, we were not there on the science side. So I think there's strengths. There's obviously things that the fish habitat partnerships have done better than our JV or a lot of JVs. And so trying to find those sweet spots where maybe the JVs have kind of figured some things out or have some really solid approaches in some areas, maybe the fish habitat partnerships likewise in other areas. The more we're talking together, the better the collective's gonna be.
FEMA works with Pacific Birds joint venture, right?
Yeah. So then, the second question was more about partnerships, you know, I guess. And, you know, I look at like, you know, what matters in our operation, and the states attracted the Fed from our management board standpoint. They really did, you know, it was the state directors saying this is important and showing up at the board table. When that happened, you know, all the federal land management agencies, the Fish and Wildlife Service leadership got on board. And so I don't think you can never not emphasize enough the state fish and wildlife agencies and their role in all this. So we've got a great partnership with WAFA for many years. They host 12 of our employees right now. And so we find ways to work with the states all the way down to these field capacity positions. A lot of cases, the states are kicking $5,000-$10,000 into a given position per year. The tribes have been harder for us. You know, we didn't know exactly where to go with that, you know, but like I say, Jim and Adrian taught at Salish Kootenai College. He's our Western Forest Coordinator. He taught at SKC for 20 years and just a very, very humble guy that has really learned, you know, tribal relations in a pretty deep way. And so his ability now is based on friendships he has with these forestry department, you know, staff of the tribes and elders and so forth. And there's just credibility. And I don't know how you mimic that other than find people that bring them in to your circle that can build those relationships. Very important.
Thank you. This was great.
Thank you very much.
After today, so any tips or?
So, we have just a little social hour set up, for all the meeting attendees. We have a few tables reserved. It's not gonna meet everybody here, but I figured people could fill in at the bar area. So we have tables reserved at Hazelwood Food and Drink. It's like about a 6-minute walk from here towards the Mall of America. Several people here know how to get there, but reservation is under my name. We should have 2 tables now.
And I'll say, Lord, no longer did say something. Go to the Yankees, Wednesday tonight. Yeah, don't feel bad. Go have a good time. Oh, yeah. Thanks to Jake also. Follow up our sponsors. Thank you.